this WrestleTalk news, Randy Orton might be out of WWE for the rest of 2022, more evidence that Sasha Banks is gone from WWE, more news on investigations and Vince McMahon allegations, and more. Subscribe and enable notifications to Always On for daily wrestling news videos.
Support WrestleTalk!
Hey, wrestling news. Do you mind just calming down for a little bit? Thanks. On top of the madness from the last few days, we've got more bad news to pile on top of it. Fightful Select is reporting that Randy Orton might be sidelined from wrestling for the rest of 2022. The reason for this is that Orton has reportedly been suffering from a back injury for quite a while now, to the point where he had work done to help improve his condition ahead of the tag title unification match with the Usos. But unfortunately, things have reportedly gotten worse for Orton, and WWE fears that he might need to get surgery to rectify it. If he does, he'll most likely be out for the remainder of 2022. The report goes on to say that Randy Orton isn't factored into creative plans for WWE right now, when originally he was slated for a huge role this summer facing Roman Reigns. This spot has now instead reportedly been given to Riddle. As of last month, Orton had reportedly been heavily pitched and figured into SummerSlam plans, but that's not the case anymore. The report concludes by saying that there hasn't been confirmation of a surgery as of yet, and crazier things have happened than a shock recovery, but WWE have already put new creative in place, which doesn't sound good for Orton's chances of non-surgery. Though there may be a glimmer of hope in that regard, as Bob Orton, Randy's father, has commented on Randy's injury when speaking to Sportskeeda, sounding optimistic about whether or not he will require surgery. I think they'll take care of everything with rehab and everything. Fingers crossed. This comes at such a bad time for Orton, who is organically one of the most over wrestlers in WWE right now, if not the most. But hopefully WWE can pivot and take some of that goodwill and transfer it to Riddle for his big program with Reigns, where the two of them are fighting for the titles on tonight's SmackDown. So maybe we should assume some sort of non-conclusive or dirty finish to set up a rematch. Best wishes to Orton with his recovery. Yesterday we spoke about Sasha Banks potentially being released from WWE following her and Naomi walking out of the May 16th episode of Raw, which was reported by Raj Giri of Wrestling Inc., but could not be verified by any other outlets, while also not being refuted either. Well, we might have another bit of evidence now that she has in fact actually been let go from the company. Andrew Zarian of the McMahon podcast mentioned, "I cannot confirm she's been released, but I did hear late last week that her attorneys were working on getting this done." So while, again, it's still not confirmation that it's actually happened, it's another thing pointing that direction if Banks' lawyers were getting involved to ensure her release happened. It's also a bit of evidence to signify the idea that Banks is the one pushing for the release, rather than WWE being the instigators.
Hey, it's voiceover Pete, because after this video was recorded, it was brought to our attention that Sasha Banks posted an Instagram story where she said, "See now, this is why I stay off Twitter, just making stuff up for no reason weekly," which then seems to indicate that she's not left WWE after all, so who knows?
As always, stay tuned to WrestleTalk.com for the latest in this developing situation. Thank you for being awesome pledge hammers on our Patreon page, The Cleaner, Kenny Shah, and Liam Great Scott. You can get your own shout out and loads of extra bonus content by visiting us at patreon.com/WrestleTalk. And now let's talk about a WWE investigation. No, not the one we spoke about yesterday with Vince McMahon and John Laurinaitis. I mean a brand new investigation against the company. Wrestling news, please. I can only take so much. A press release was issued yesterday via Business Wire from Scott & Scott attorneys, stating that the firm was investigating whether certain directors and officers of World Wrestling Entertainment Inc. breached their fiduciary duties to WWE and its shareholders. Now, I'm sure a lot of you watching this, just like me, know what fiduciary means and didn't have to look it up and how to pronounce it. But just for those of you who don't, which again, isn't me, fiduciary duties refers to trust, especially between a trustee and a beneficiary, which in this case is that trust between WWE and its shareholders, the trust that WWE is acting for the shareholders' best interest. The law firm is looking into whether WWE's board of directors or senior management failed to manage WWE in an acceptable manner in breach of their fiduciary duties to WWE, and whether WWE and its shareholders have suffered damages as a result. The House of Cards is crumbling. If one investigation wasn't enough, now there's two going on, and Vince McMahon is going to trial with Oliver Luck over XFL accusations as well. It's Not a good time to be Vincent McMahon, apparently. But now let's talk about that other investigation and its allegations, where Vince McMahon, the CEO, and John Laurinaitis, the head of talent relations of WWE, had a sexual relationship with a former employee of WWE and gave her $3 million of hush money to cover it up. Many have speculated what will happen to Vince McMahon going into and coming out of this investigation, and Dave Meltzer on Wrestling Observer Radio has weighed in with his thoughts, saying that he's spoken to many in big business who think that Vince McMahon will not survive as CEO when this is all said and done. In terms of the actual WWE talent, according to Meltzer, they had no idea about these allegations prior to them airing. Talent didn't know anything at all. This all hit them the same time it hit us, and they don't really know what to make of it. They're all asking questions, obviously the same questions that we're all asking. Another question many have been asking is who leaked these details to the Wall Street Journal in the first place? And once again, according to Meltzer, it's looking likely it was one of the people on the board of directors. It may have been the person who leaked it to the board, then leaking it, and the Wall Street Journal finding out about the dates and everything, being told that from the outside, but the fact of the investigation and everything seems to indicate that somebody on the board did. And so you've got 12 people there. Obviously, Vince didn't, so you've got 11 people there you can look at. It could be one of those, but we don't really have that answer, obviously. WWE's board of directors currently has 12 people on it, those being Vince McMahon, Stephanie McMahon, Nick Khan, Paul Levesque, aka Triple H, Steve Koonin, Ignace Lahoud, Erica Nardini, Steve Pamon, Connor Schell, Manjit Singh, Jeffrey Speed, and Alan Wetzler. It was also mentioned by Meltzer that Manjit Singh was the one heading up the investigations. In amongst all of these allegations, people have had question marks about Linda McMahon and her and Vince's relationship, and Meltzer noted that technically they're married. They haven't been together for a long, long time though. For those people out there who may be thinking, well, Vince didn't actually do anything wrong, and believe me, I've seen a few people saying that, it turns out relationships like these are prohibited by WWE's own code of conduct. Taking aside the ethical side of these allegations, just from a purely legal standpoint, this sort of thing can't happen by WWE's own rules. According to WWE's code of conduct, an example of prohibited behavior is the grant or offer of an employment quid pro quo for personal intimacy. And where the allegations state that the former paralegal had their salary doubled following the onset of the sexual relationship with Vince McMahon, this would be in direct opposition to this example of prohibited behavior. Just as a fun aside, this salary increase reportedly came in April 2021. You know, when there were mass releases from the company because of budget cuts. Budget cuts. 100k salary increase makes sense to me. This salary increase is what those in WWE reportedly see as the most damaging aspect of these allegations, as this means that company money was involved in this relationship, whereas the $3 million hush money, while ethically questionable, was not in violation of WWE's policies, as WWE's resident lawyer Jeremy Devitt has stated it was paid out of Vince McMahon's personal money, not WWE's. On top of all this, we have the leave of absence of Stephanie McMahon, who was listed as one of those board of director members earlier, lest we forget. With it almost being a month since Stephanie announced her absence, a question people have had is, did Stephanie know about these allegations before she took that leave of absence? And the answer is seemingly yes. According to the Wall Street Journal, these investigations started in April, and Stephanie took her absence in May. Furthermore, Dave Meltzer noted on Wrestling Observer Radio, the board of directors started getting this information a couple of months ago. They got the information before Stephanie quit, so Stephanie would have known about this before she quit. Whether this is tied in or not to her decision to leave, we do not know, but the timing becomes very, very interesting because of her leaving, and then of her being buried on the way out. And when all of those stories broke, both her leaving and her being buried later, when that came out a couple of weeks later, we kept saying there's more to the story. Why would Vince bury her? And I still don't have an answer as to why, but this does add an element, another dynamic of everything that was going on while this was going on. And another aspect to this whole thing, do you see why Ollie and I said yesterday that this could be the biggest news story in a decade, is WWE's relationships with NBC NBC and Fox, and whether they could become strained because of this, or even more drastically, if they could pull out of their contracts. On Wrestling Observer Radio, Meltzer spoke about if there was something called a morals clause in their deals, allowing a party to pull out of a contract deal. He didn't know if there was one in place for Saudi Arabia and their deal, but there absolutely is with the television deals. I don't see them cancelling a television show, especially NBCU, because of the value between Peacock and everything. WWE's got a lot in there and they don't want to lose that. But if the pressure is there and it becomes a big enough media story, they could cancel. I don't think they will cancel. They also could put a lot of pressure on, and that would also be a very interesting thing. The last thing for today, I promise, is that there was a rumor floating around the internet yesterday that a lot of people that sold WWE stock immediately prior to these allegations coming out were in breach of insider trading. One rumor pinned Kevin Dunn in violation of this insider trading. However, the basis of the argument was that he was on the WWE board of directors, which, as I listed them earlier, he is not. As such, he wouldn't or shouldn't have known about the investigations, as it was the board of directors who were informed about it and investigating it themselves, and as such, he would not be in violation of insider trading. Right, that's it. That's the news for today. I know, it's a lot. The Rock also bought Tamina a house. Isn't that nice? Yay. I'm gonna go lie down now. Watch more news if you want. Ollie and I went through all the Vince McMahon allegation stuff yesterday with our own opinions thrown in, if that interests you.
For more clarification, the board of directors is 12 people. They are at the tippity top of WWE. It's not like a wrestler has leaked this report to the Wall Street Journal. No. It's not like someone in middle management, like a Bruce Pritchard, has leaked this information. Really, you've got to look at the people who would have been aware of this very new investigation, and you can kind of put it to the room where it happened.